What's up, everybody? So to briefly explain what I'm basically doing here, I'm conducting an experiment where I go through all sorts of political journalists and pundits. I pair each pundit up with a specific political issue, and I cover as much ground as possible with everything the internet has to offer in regards to their input on the issue. So for example, right now I'm covering Morning Joe, and the political issue is Muslim immigration. So I go over every article and video where the Morning Joe panel covers Muslim immigration. My goal for this years down the road is to truly understand why people have certain views on any political issue, and to help other people understand where everyone else is coming from, even if it means understanding the enemy. I've covered 30 political pundits and 4 political issues so far. The issues so far being Trump's proposed border wall, deportation of criminal immigrants, sanctuary cities, and Muslim immigration. I've covered about an even number of Republicans and Democrats over these subjects. Obviously cover mainstream media, but I prefer independent sources, and this is the 4th actual video I've made. One thing that is unique about what I'm doing is when I started, I wasn't very knowledgeable with regards to politics, so I figured this would be an interesting insight on someone's political journey, so I'm basically learning as I go along, while simultaneously doing my best to be extremely detailed with how I analyze the videos and articles I go over. So since I'm on my 99th critique, I'm obviously more knowledgeable compared to my first critique, but I still have a lot to learn. I haven't gotten too much feedback, so therefore I haven't had the exposure of much criticism, so if you have any input at all, I'd be glad to hear it. Alright, so the title to the video we're going to critique today is called Donald Trump on Muslim Travel Ban, Obama in 2016, Morning Joe, MSNBC. Alright, so this video is published on December 8th, 2015. So this video was published about 2.5 years ago. Alright, so the description reads, 2016 GOP presidential candidate Donald Trump returns for part 2 of a discussion with the Morning Joe panel on his proposal to ban Muslims from traveling to the U.S., President Obama, and 2016, and his message to Muslims. Also, I would like to note that the description does not address the insanity that's contained in this video.
All right, we're back with Donald Trump. Donald, we've got a lot of people around the table. Willie, Nicole, Mark Halpern would love to ask you some questions.
They're all like, we're going to destroy this clown.
I want to just ask you a couple of questions. First of all, it seems to me that going after all Muslims, banning all Muslims from coming here is as counterproductive as, you know, those pictures when you see little 7-year-old kids being screened by the TSA. It seems to me, just in terms of policing, we should focus, we should target on the Muslims that we have a reason to believe need to have the most law enforcement focused on them. Isn't it counterproductive and unconstitutional to just have this broad approach towards all Muslims?
Yes.
Well, it's not unconstitutional keeping people out, frankly, and until we get a hold of what's going on, Joe. And then if you look at Franklin Roosevelt, a respected president, highly respected, take a look at presidential proclamations back a long time ago, 25-25, 25-26, and 25-27, what he was doing with Germans, Italians, and Japanese, because he had to do it. Because, look, we are at war with radical Islam. We are at war, Joe, whether we like it or not.
Yes, back a long time ago during World War II. I'm not saying ISIS isn't a serious issue, especially in 2015, but it doesn't even compare to the scale of World War II. And not to mention that was 75 years ago, and there should be more efficient and sensible ways of dealing with these international issues after all this time.
Donald, I agree with that,
right.
But you certainly aren't proposing internment camps. I mean,
No,
you don't support what FDR did with internment camps,
I am not proposing that, and that's not what this. If you have to look at his presidential proclamations. It was tough stuff, but it wasn't internment. We're not talking about the Japanese internment camps. No, not at all. But we have to get our hand around a very serious problem, and it's getting worse. And you will have more World Trade Centers, and you will have more bigger than the World Trade Center if we don't toughen up, smarten up, and use our heads.
Donald Trump's campaign-winning words: tough, smart, head, vigilant, great, grab, pussy. On a serious note though, why does Trump keep going back to referencing FDR in this video when he keeps falling to the internment camp trap? You'll see more of what I'm talking about as the video goes on. Really pay attention to when the internment camps get brought up.
Willie.
Donald, it's Willie.
Hi, Willie.
You've said you want to do this just for a few weeks, not a long-term plan, you said, until, quote, we can figure out what the hell is going on. How will you know when the coast is clear for Muslims to come back into this country? What will you be looking for?
Well, I didn't say a few weeks, Willie, but maybe it could be a few weeks, but hopefully we need people to get their arms around the situation. It's a terrible situation. I will go a step further. You have to look at areas that have become become radicalized in other places, they are not the same places, Willie. They are places that you do not want to go to. You do not want to take your family there. You do not want to walk through the streets.
It's like hearing your grandfather talk about terrorism after he watched one 15-minute Muslim exclusive on Fox News. And of course, Trump is talking like this intentionally, with the end goal being as easy to understand and comprehend for his catered audience as possible. Of course, by doing this, he grossly generalizes and sounds more incompetent than he actually is. That's what I think anyways. On the same token, I'm not saying what he's saying should be completely disregarded.
Even the police don't want to walk through the streets.
Where's this?
So we have to be careful.
Where is that, Donald?
Paris.
Where in
Paris? Take a look at the radicalized areas, the Muslim areas in Paris. Joe, the police won't go there.
Where though? Where are you hearing that?
Oh, it's all over. I mean, it's all over the place. I know Paris. I mean, it's all over the place. You take a trip to Paris sometime, Joe, and enjoy yourself.
I have my guilty pleasure Donald Trump moments, and this is one of them. Actually, there are a lot. The man is hilarious. And he also looked like a bubbling idiot here.
Well, I hardly ever get out of Escambia County, Florida, but when I do, I'll look at Paris. I might go to Staten Island instead.
Okay.
But do you know specifically
I'll go to
parts?
Staten Island,
Do you know what parts of Paris specifically? Since you visited there?
No, I can get you the information. Joe, it's well known, well documented. I will get you the information.
Okay,
Google it. Nah, for real though. I hate when people seem unprepared on national TV, regardless of who it is.
Right. Donald, but just to follow up, I mean, what you're talking about is finding solutions to a huge global problem. So how will you know when it's time to open the borders of the United States to Muslims again? That could go on indefinitely.
Issue visas.
Mika said issue visas, just in case anybody missed that.
Yeah.
It's all it can be is a feel or a touch. We have to find it out. Look, how many more people have gotten checks put into their accounts? Obviously, somebody gave them money, and I hope that the FBI and our great law enforcement are able to figure this out. But they have tremendous money. I said, knock out the oil. Nobody listened to me. Nobody knocked out the oil. I said, check the banking systems. They have very intricate banking webs. ISIS, I'm talking about. Nobody checks the banking systems. They have tremendous money. How many other people are given $28,000 or more or less to go out and do destruction like these two animals did the other day in California? We have a very serious problem, and we can solve the problem, but we have to solve it through intelligence, and we have to solve it through toughness.
I'm curious to what countries besides Saudi Arabia funded ISIS.
This is Nicole.
Hi, Nicole.
Hi.
I hope your father still likes me.
Well, I was going to ask you about your supporters, because you have a lot of supporters, and they have been drawn to your strength and your straight talk for many, many months now.
I'd bet her father most likely doesn't, judging by her condescending tone.
You've been atop of the Republican field for a long time now. Do you feel any obligation to them to balance your passion for these issues in the wake of the Paris attacks in San Bernardino with things that comport with our values and our Constitution?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I have an obligation, not just to my supporters, to the country. I mean, I feel I have a great obligation to the country, and I think I'm saying something that has to be said. And not all the candidates, by the way, that I'm running against have come out and scorned me for this. I mean, I'm using common sense, and I'm using something that we have to use. But you're going to have other World Trade Centers. You are going to have other cities being blown up, and we don't want that. We don't want that to happen. That's going to happen. We have very, very lax laws. We have a president that's incompetent. We have a president that made a speech the other night that was, at the end of the speech, I said, what did he say? He didn't say anything.
That's what they all say, nothing, including Trump's frustrating dialogue. Except he just repeats himself over and over and over and over and over.
He said nothing.
So Donald, and I agree with you on that too. But let me ask you this: a week ago or so, you said that you've got Muslim American friends, that most Muslims are good people. Do you still believe that this week, that most Muslims are good, wonderful people?
I think they're underestimating Trump with these kind of questions they assumed at the time would stump the Trump. They need to hit him with more fact-based issues more often compared to trying to find out whether or not Trump likes most Muslims. I believe his motivations are pretty clear here, so why harp on how he personally feels about Muslims? Of course he's going to give a formulaic answer.
Oh, yes, I do, and I do have friends. And by the way, my friends agree with me. My friends say that when they become radicalized, they become different people.
So let me ask you this, and this is, I'm going to propose a little challenge to you here. Dwight Eisenhower in 1957 went to an Islamic center in Washington, D.C. What if you and I go to an Islamic center in Washington, D.C., or we can go to to a mosque somewhere in New York and just talk to Muslims there. Would you be interested in doing that?
I would, but, a talk is cheap.
God, it's so ridiculous. How did they not see that rebuttal coming? I thought Joe's question just a minute ago about what parts of Paris were the most violent made Trump look incompetent, but then Joe just shoots himself in the foot with a proposal for Trump to visit mosques and learn more about Muslim culture.
Talk is very easy. I mean, if you talked to these two people, these two horrible people, everyone said they were normal. Now, that they were not radicalized. Nobody knew. Now, the fact is that many people knew, Joe. The neighbors knew.
He's not talking about some kind of conspiracy that Muslim leaders are in on this. No, he's literally talking about the next-door neighbors of the terrorists.
Right, but you and I both know if we're going to win the war against ISIS and if we're going to stop terror in America, we have to make sure the Muslim American community is on our side. It's like community policing. You've seen, my gosh, you were tough on crime in New York City in the 1980s. You took out full-page ads. And then you have Giuliani, Bloomberg, and others coming together, and they did community policing. Right. So if you see something, you report something.
I've always been tough on crime.
I've always been tough on crime. He's straight out of a comic book, I swear to God.
We need to do the same thing with the Muslim community, where the Muslim Americans see themselves as part of the American fabric, where they're on our side against the radicals. Don't we need to reach out to them?
I want them to be on our side, Joe. I hope they are on our side. Many people knew what was going on in that thug's apartment. Many people. I watched his sister being interviewed.
Right.
I think she's lying.
Many more didn't, though, Donald. That's what I'm saying. Just imagine if we can engage the Muslim community more actively in America, then it's more likely that those thugs that you described will actually be reported to police, right?
I disagree with some of this rhetoric going on in American society right now about how everything should be peaceful and equal, and of course there's some things I agree with as well. In this case, I agree with Joe. Trump doesn't have a well-structured argument with regards to this specific act of terrorism. Like I said before, you would think based on how he goes about talking about the story that this was some kind of undercover ring of radical Islamic terrorism in America. No, he's talking about like 5, maybe 6 people who lived in an apartment complex who might have known about this man being a terrorist.
You know what? I think that's great, Joe, and it sounds good and it's beautiful words, but the sad part is, if you just look at this example of what just took place in California, many people knew that there's some really strange and bad things going on. One guy said, and even more than one guy, about racial profiling. I didn't want to report him because I didn't want to be a racial profiler. Give me a break.
So what did he see, Trump? Was he suspicious based only on the color of the man's skin and the clothes he had on? If so, that would be racial profiling. If not, he's a big fat pussy. Because if he had a legitimate reason to report that, he should have.
He wasn't a racial and what I'm saying is this, Joe. We have to use our heads. We have to be strong. We have to be vigilant. And until we can get our hands around the situation, we have to do something, and we have to do it now. If you look at some of the statistics that came out, I don't know if you read this, but 25% of those polled agreed that violence against Americans here in the United States is justified as part of the global jihad. These are people living in the United States.
Is that the Frank Gaffney poll?
What?
Is that the Frank Gaffney poll?
That's a Gaffney poll, and they also have a Pew Research poll.
Yeah, the two are far different. Pew's a lot more respectable than Gaffney's poll.
See, that right there is very hard-hitting against Trump. Joe used finesse to delegitimize Trump's statistic. He wasn't being smug or condescending. He basically said, yeah, that poll's bullshit. And I Googled it, and the Frank Gaffney poll appears to be biased bullshit against Muslims. Joe could have pressed Trump on that a little more, but that's just me nitpicking.
Let's go to Mark Halpern in Orlando. Mark.
Mr. Trump, Dick Cheney is not running against you for president, and I don't think he's considered a guy who's politically correct. He described what you're proposing as goes against everything we stand for and believe in. What do you think he means by that, and do you have any sympathy for that point of view?
Trump eats these liberal douches for breakfast. Joe needs to step back in and keep fact-checking Trump because Trump ends up making this Mark guy his bitch.
Well, I have sympathy for everything. I mean, I understand all points of view.
Trump's out of whack egos beyond any other human living today. I wouldn't be surprised at all if the next thing he said was, I am all-knowing. Well, I understand all points of view is almost the same thing.
I'm just saying that I know how to get things done, and we're not getting it done. If we continue to go on the path that we're doing, we're losing to ISIS in the war because we have a president that doesn't know how to fight the war. We have a president that doesn't even know what to call the term.
Mr. Trump, if you would, explain that point of view. Explain, you said you have sympathy for it. So what do you think Dick Cheney means when he says it goes against everything we stand for and believe in?
Shots fired, pun intended. I hope people get that gun pun.
He'd like to make everybody all-inclusive. Now, I'm not really sure. If he really felt that way, maybe he wouldn't have gotten us into that horrible war in Iraq, which, by the way, I was opposed to. I was opposed to the war in Iraq. You know, people think I'm militant. I'm so militant that I'm the only one practically that you can say was opposed to the war in Iraq. There were very few of us because I said it would destabilize the Middle East. And a lot of that has led to this.
It's better to just say the shit you want to say to Trump and say it to his face if you're a public figure, because if you don't, you're going to end up looking like an idiot if you just make some kind of snarky negative comment about him to some random news source.
Let me just tell you, I fully understand what people say, and hopefully this doesn't take long, but our people, law enforcement in particular, has to get their hands around a big problem. How many other checks were sent to people all over the country that have been radicalized?
So you agree this goes against...
Joe, nobody knew this guy was radicalized. The white probably radicalized him.
You agree this goes against American values?
Well, no, because FDR did it, if you look at it. I mean, they said the same thing when I said we have to do, strong borders. And yet then they look back in 1954 and Dwight Eisenhower, I like Ike. His theme was I like Ike. Everybody liked Ike.
Did the Japanese...
He did it. So,
I do believe Trump starts to get a little nervous here. He rattles off example after example of presidents who are responsible for making similar national security policies, but he does it in a way that seems desperate. It's not too apparent, and I might be reading into it just a little bit too much.
Did the Japanese internment camps go against American values?
We have to be smart, Mark, and we have to be vigilant.
Right.
And if we're not going to be smart and vigilant, and honestly, we also have to be tough. And if we're not going to be those three things, we're not going to have a country left.
Did the internment of the Japanese violate American values?
I don't fully understand why Trump doesn't answer his question directly, but I think I have an idea.
We're not talking about internment. There's a whole different thing.
I understand, but I'm just asking you to weigh in on that.
No, this is a whole different thing. You're asking me a different question. Don't ask me that question.
I'm asking you a different question.
What about,
did the Japanese internment camps? Did the Japanese internment camps violate your sense of American values?
Mark, what about Franklin Roosevelt's presidential proclamations 25, 25, 25, 26, and 25, 27? Take a look at it, Mark.
I skimmed through all of them. It's basically the proclamations FDR made in World War II to officially make the Japanese, Germans, and Italians enemies of the country. It's quite clear that Trump doesn't believe that the Japanese internment camps violated American values. Mark should have connected the internment camps and the proclamations and used the combination of those two things against Trump, unless he didn't know enough about the proclamations to do so.
Just ask you one more time. Did the internment of the Japanese Americans violate your sense of American values? Yes or no?
I don't want to respond to it. You know why? That's not what we're doing. You're asking me a different question. That's not what we're doing.
But for some people, the same values are at stake. It's singling out.
It's wonderful that you asked me that. That's an entirely different question. Has no relationship to what I'm talking about.
I kind of see where Trump is coming from, because internment camps is not what he's proposing. He doesn't want to just give a yes or no answer without being able to discuss that particular issue in depth.
Gene Robinson, jump in.
Donald, your campaign has changed.
Gene, I hope you still write well about me.
I imagine when Trump says shit like this, it's similar to a prank phone call where a bunch of people are listening in on it. His rich friends are huddled around him, and everyone's trying not to laugh.
Oh, come on.
Thanks, man. I'm going to have a beer. It's fun.
Take it easy, Kev.
Hey, thanks, Jordan. Thanks a lot.
Well, your campaign has changed. When you started your campaign, you were appealing to people's aspirations. You're now appealing to their fears, their basest fears. And I just want to know, do you feel good about that?
No.
Do you feel good about what you're doing?
No. I want to see a country where we can live in peace, where buildings aren't going to be blown up, where people aren't going to walk into a room with innocent people with no guns, because there's no Second Amendment for those people, unfortunately.
This is pretty great. Trump essentially doubled down on this man's opening criticism.
They didn't have guns. If they had guns, it would have been a different story. But I really want where people aren't going to walk into a place and shoot everybody and they have no protection. I mean, Gene, we have a World Trade Center got knocked down almost twice. The first time, people forget the first time. But we have other things happening. We have ISIS that wants to destroy us, and we take people openly, and then we find out they become radicalized. And what you do is you have to look at other parts of the world and see what happens when this happens. It's a very, very serious problem for our country.
How exactly do people become radicalized? There needs to be more discussions on the fundamentals of Islam.
All right, it is the top of the hour. We're talking with presidential candidate Donald Trump about his controversial proposal that has certainly made waves in the political community over the past 24 hours. Donald, along with this plan you're proposing, I know that you and Joe talked a little bit about engaging Muslims, and you called it beautiful words, but I do want to take it further and ask you, along with your plan, let's say it could actually be carried out, what would you do alongside that to engage the Muslim community here in America and around the world?
For this exclusive, Joe and Mika seem to be better off on their own interviewing and debating Trump. Everyone else isn't really helping. I mean, Willie can stay.
I would want to engage the Muslim community, but the Muslim community has to help us, Mika. They're not helping us. The Muslim community is not reporting what's going on. They should be reporting that their next-door neighbor is making pipe bombs, and they've got them all over the place. The mothers in the apartment, other people. His friend was buying him rifles. Nobody was reporting that. The Muslim community has to help us, because without the Muslim community, we would have to get very tough and much tougher, and I don't want to do that. But the Muslim community, it's not a one-way street. The Muslim community knew that this guy, what he was doing, and his wife, his very heavily radicalized wife, they knew what they were doing was wrong. Nobody called the police. Nobody said, this is what happened. One person said, no, he didn't call the police because he didn't want to be a racial
Donald,
profiler.
you can't generalize from this one incident and say that Muslims aren't helping law enforcement officers across America, because they are.
There you go, Joe.
I don't think they are much, Joe. They are to a very little extent, but not nearly to the extent that, I mean, look, not nearly to the extent that they should be.
See, once they start calling legitimate BS on Trump, they cut off to someone else without really pressing Trump more. They let it deflate instead of really using it to damage him. Granted, the next question is good.
Willie.
Don, I want to go back to your what you call temporary shutdown of Muslims entering the United States. I get the concept, but I want to know how it works practically. How does it work at the border? Let's say a man and his family want to travel here from Europe.
Willie,
what happens at customs?
Willie, there's certainly going to be exceptions made, like, for instance, sporting events and other things. Hopefully this wouldn't take very long. But you know what? By doing this, what we really need help from are the Muslims that do know what's going on, the neighbors of people that are looking to do harm. They have to call the police.
Donald, I understand that, and you've made that point, but I just want to know how it works. Religion doesn't appear on a passport. Would there be questioning at the border in Europe before they got to the United States? Would it happen here in America? How would this work?
It could happen at the site. It could happen here. It could happen in many different forms, Willie. That would have to be worked out. And I don't think it would be for an extended period of time.
And a customs agent would ask the person his or her religion? Donald, a customs agent would then ask the person his or her religion?
Well, damn. I hadn't really put that much thought into it. I still have a year left before I'm elected president, you know.
That would be probably, they would say, are you Muslim?
Well, okay. Fair enough.
And if they said yes, they would not be allowed in the country.
That's correct.
So some guy crosses over with all the stereotypical Muslim attire, turban and everything, and says, "No, infidel. I mean brother. I am Christian. Allah be with you."
Mark Alperin.
Mr. Trump, I gather you were supposed to attend a Republican National Committee fundraiser tomorrow, and now you're not. Are you not going, and if not, why not?
See, they ask two great questions back to back, and then they take 3 steps back by asking him something irrelevant like this, which shouldn't be a problem, but it does backfire.
I don't know. I honestly don't know anything about it. I'm funding my own campaign, so I don't need money, to put it mildly. So I don't know anything about a fundraiser tomorrow. I mean, Mark, I'm funding my own campaign.
I understand. This was a fundraiser for the Republican Party. It was announced that you were attending.
If anything, this question makes Trump look good, but with regards to the question itself, we the people do not care.
Don't know if I'm going or not. I have no idea. I didn't know it was on my schedule, frankly. All I know is I'm funding my own campaign. I'm not getting money from the special interests, from the lobbyists, and from the donors, like every other candidate.
When you said that some of the candidates hadn't been, of the other Republican candidates hadn't been critical of you, who were you referring to?
Well, I haven't heard from Cruz. I haven't heard from Rand Paul. Somebody said came out with a proposal that was similar, actually, similar and in many ways more broad. I had heard that. I don't think he commented. I doubt he will comment on me. You know, I wouldn't say that I'm his favorite person.
He's the best of the best at creating a media storm around himself. It's almost like he's criticizing these two opponents for not even commenting on him. Granted, that was the question, but at the same time, he answers it in a very clear and tactical way.
Of course, he's not doing too well, maybe because of me. But Rand Paul, I think, has got a proposal that was pretty severe. Actually, Cruz's proposal was pretty severe, too. But, you know, not everybody. And most of the ones that are, you know, guys like Kasich, he's got no polling numbers. He's made a fool out of himself. He's one of the worst debaters I've ever seen. And some of the others are, you know, just people that are just hanging around.
Like strings on a puppet.
Ted Cruz did say he disagreed with the policy. There are some who are accusing, including the New York Times, one of your favorite papers, is saying you chose to make this announcement because one poll showed you behind in Iowa. Just speak from your heart.
I don't call it the New York
Why
Times.
did you do this?
I call it the failing, money-losing New York Times. Look, let me tell you something. CNN came out with a poll yesterday that has me clobbering everybody in Iowa. There was another poll that came out. I don't know the poll, but it came out where I was a little behind Cruz in Iowa. Only in Iowa. Nationwide, I'm leading in every poll. And in every other poll, there's one outlier came out yesterday. I disagree with their polling methods and data, but CNN, which does do very good polling and highly respected.
So with the exception to their polling, everything else is fake news. Right.
Came out with a poll where, am I correct, Mark, or do you want to correct me? I was absolutely clobbering everybody. Do you agree with that?
You're ahead in that CNN poll and many other polls.
Not ahead, Mark. How much ahead was I, Mark?
Way ahead.
In a way, this reminds me of that one badass Breaking Bad scene.
Say my name. Heisenberg. You're goddamn right.
Way ahead. Mr. Trump, you are way ahead in the polls. You could become the Republican nominee. You could become our future president.
Well, Mark really fucked that up. Despite the fact that he was the most aggressive towards Trump in this video, I think he underestimated Trump and he didn't think through the questions he had prepared to ask Trump as thoroughly as he should have. He did good in the beginning at pressing Trump, but derailed horribly in the second half of his portion of the interview. As the great troll Donald John Trump once said,
"We have to be smart, Mark."
How do you think your first meetings with leaders of, say, the United Arab Emirates, where they are a superb ally, they're flying missions over ISIS, they have women in their army, how do you think those meetings would go after you had proposed, and it sounds like you have ideas for implementing a policy like this?
I think I'll get along great with them.
He didn't even respond in an arrogant way, but instead in a warm, humble, assuring kind of way. Not saying that makes it assuring, just the way he answered this is in contrast to how he's answered everything else before in this video. And from what I've read, Trump's not doing a bad job getting along with Islamic leaders as of March 2018.
I've always been a unifier. I've even gotten along with Joe and Mika for years. If you could do that, you could do anything.
This
and
is
frankly,
true.
I think.
But really, you don't
by
think
the way,
you'd create
Nicole,
any...
you know who's not a unifier is President Obama. He's a disaster. He's the greatest divider I've ever seen.
I don't disagree with you. But
wait, you don't?
You don't
see
any. So you're at the top of the polls. You seem to be on track to be our party's nominee. You don't see any danger to our relationships around the world when you propose banning the world's 1.5 billion Muslims from entering our country indefinitely?
Good. We're back on track with good questions.
Okay, Nicole, let's talk about our relationships around the world.
Sure.
We don't have relationships around the world. Every country that we're supposed to... Russia hates us. China hates us. We're not talking too much with the Muslim problem there, but you go around, the Middle East blew up around President Obama and Hillary Clinton. It's a war zone. You look at Iraq, you look at Iran. Iran just took us to the cleaners with a deal where they got $150 billion, and they can have all the nuclear weapons. Within 10 years, they'll have more nuclear weapons than we ever had.
Yeah, that was pretty fucked up.
So when you say about our relationships with other countries, for the most part, we have no relationships with other countries. We have been in free fall as far as relationship is concerned. I guarantee you our relationships will be far better than they are right now, because right now we have a president that was not meant to be president. He is a disaster.
I'm not dismissing the fact that there's truth to what he's saying here, but I get the sense that Trump has some sort of personal vendetta against Obama. I have no proof, so take what I say with a grain of salt.
Your credentials and breadth of experience. For example, no, seriously, just recently in an episode of Celebrity Apprentice at the steakhouse, the men's cooking team did not impress the judges from Omaha Steaks. And there was a lot of blame to go around, but you, Mr. Trump, recognized that the real problem was a lack of leadership. And so ultimately you didn't blame Little John or Meatloaf. You fired Gary Busey. And these are the kind of decisions that would keep me up at night. Well handled, sir. Well handled.
No proof at all.
So you'd waive the ban for the leaders of Middle Eastern countries?
Of course I would, yes, of course.
So from 1945 to 1991, Donald, we were engaged in a Cold War where the actual balance of the human race hung in the balance. We feared nuclear war. We still let Russians come to America, though, despite the fact that the danger was actually greater if you looked at the Cold War and mutually assured destruction. If we had banned Russians from immigrating to this country, coming to this country, we wouldn't have Google.
The problem with what Joe's saying here is that people who are pro-Trump see it as saying, if we didn't put American lives at risk from 1945 to 1991, there would be no Google. It's not a very good basis for a debate, in my opinion, especially a debate with Trump.
Well, no, I'm not looking at that, Joe. Joe, take a look back at Roosevelt and take a look about the alien Germans. Right. They called them alien Germans, alien Italians, alien Japanese. Because we were at war, Joe, we're at war right now. Whether you like it or not, we are at war with radical Islam.
Donald, I agree with you. The difference between you and me, though, is I want to get as many Muslims on our side as possible. And it seems to me that your approach divides Muslim Americans and don't make them feel like they have a stake in the American dream. I believe, and you look, there are I think Muslim Americans have buying power of about $100 billion in this country. There are great entrepreneurs that are Muslim Americans, law-abiding Muslim Americans. They actually employ tens of thousands of Americans. I want them on our side. I want Muslims across the world on our side.
They agree with the severity of the situation, but disagree with the solution. There's not much of a moral debate beyond that.
Joe, so do I. But you said it will divide. They're already divided, Joe.
You say they.
The Muslim
5%, 10%?
Joe,
if we have 90%, don't we want...
Can you imagine if 10% of Muslims were radical terrorists? I would have to be fully on board with a Muslim ban at that point. Actually, they would probably all be dead anyways if that were the case, so there wouldn't be a travel ban on Muslims in 2018.
I mean, you talk about, you're great at making deals. You understand you make deals by drawing people in and getting as many people on your side. It seems to me the last thing you want to do is divide the very people that we need to focus on to be on our side. If Muslims are on our side in America and across the world, we win this war against ISIS.
Joe, we're not winning anything right now.
No,
that
we're
I can
not.
tell you. Do you think we're winning against ISIS
I just said,
now,
no,
Joe?
we're not. I'm talking about how we win the war ultimately.
Joe, we will win by being firm, by being tough.
Like I said, nothing to gain from a moral debate on this subject at this point.
Being smart, and we will draw them in. Right now, we're not drawing them in. Right now, things are going on right now that you don't know about that I don't know about, that nobody, right now, there are things that are going on that you have so-called people that you think are on our side, and they're not reporting it, they're not talking about it, and in some cases they're involved with it. I mean, look, I'll give you an example. Some of our so-called allies that we work with and we protect them militarily, they're sending massive amounts of money to ISIS and to Al-Qaeda and to others.
Who are you talking about there?
You know who it is. What do I have to bring it up for? You know who it is.
Because you're running for president. Are you talking about the Saudis?
Just watch Joe and Mika here. They obviously know the countries Trump is talking about, and they all know it would be a bad idea to just start naming off every country on national television that send money to ISIS. That would be retarded.
Oh, other countries are giving massive amounts of money. People from other countries are giving massive amounts of money.
Are you saying the Saudis are doing this?
Of course they're doing it. Everybody knows that.
Okay, any other countries?
There are, but I'm not going to say it because I have a lot of relationships with people. But there are. And you know that, and everybody knows that, and nobody says it. Nobody talks about it.
But you're not even saying the countries that are doing it right now. Why aren't you willing to name those? You say you have a lot of relationships there.
Next question.
All you have to do is check your records, and our government knows the countries, and one of them happens to be Saudi Arabia, and our government knows that. And why aren't we doing anything about it? Why aren't we being firm as to why are we allowing that to happen?
So why don't you think we are?
What?
Why don't you think we are doing anything about it?
Because I think we have an incompetent president.
At least I will go down as a president.
No, that one didn't age well.
Well, is he the only president that has had a policy, basically
I think our previous president did not do the job. I wasn't exactly a big fan, as you know. He may be a Republican, but I wasn't exactly a big fan. I was the one that called Osama bin Laden. I would have had Osama bin Laden knocked out, and maybe the World Trade Center, as it was, would have been standing right now.
Whether you disagree with him or not, I truly believe Trump loves America. The first time I had that thought pop into my head was the time I watched an interview with Trump at Ground Zero 2 days after the tower fell. He appeared very involved in providing any kind of aid he could and gave off a very sincere vibe. Just giving credit to where credit's due.
Now, let me ask you this. It looks right now like the rest of the Republican candidates are divided against you. If you get to the convention and let's say there's a brokered...
Joe, that's been from the beginning.
All right, so let's say there's a brokered convention and you go in with the most delegates. If they don't give you the nomination, will you break away from the Republican Party and run as an independent?
I can't tell you that, Joe. I signed a pledge for fairness, and I assume they're going to live up to that. I think that I'm going to win the nomination in terms of popular support. I'm very popular, the poll that came out yesterday in Iowa, the poll that came out 2 days ago, it sort of indicates that very strongly. I'm way ahead in every category.
I'm curious if Trump would continuously boast about himself forever if everyone would remain quiet. He was correct about the polls, though.
Every state and nationally. So
let's turn the page from politics really quickly. I want to talk policy. Right now,
the original video has a 20 to 25 second pause, so I didn't cut anything out in the original video except for the pause.
ISIS's land away from them.
Okay, here's what I'd do. I'd knock out the Capitol, and I'd knock it out big and strong. I'd take over the oil, and I'd keep the oil.
All right,
That's
so do
what
you
I'd
do that with ground? You need ground troops to do that,
And I've been saying that, Joe, for 3 years.
Right, but you need ground troops to do that?
You'll need some ground troops. Yeah, you'll need ground troops.
What do you think? 10,000, 20,000? Do you have any number?
Listen, Joe, I'm not giving them back the oil. I'm keeping the oil. There's a big difference.
Trump talks all this shit about politicians despite the fact that he avoids answering questions directly as much as any of them.
I understand. I think we have Ted Cruz coming on later this week. I'm going to be asking him specifics on how we defeat ISIS because we're not winning. I agree with you right now, and we have to defeat ISIS.
The only way you're going to beat ISIS, Joe, is to take their financing away, to take their money away, and the way you're going to do that is by banking.
Mika said, and their land, just in case anyone missed it.
And by knocking out their oil.
I want to get specific with you like I will with Ted Cruz and everybody else because I think people need to start giving us specifics on how we get there.
Well, I've been specific.
10,000 troops?
Joe,
I'm talking specifically about ground troops.
Joe,
because
I've been more specific than any other candidate.
So I'm trying to drill down a little bit because we're not going to win by carpet bombing, as some candidates say. So would you support saying 10,000 ground troops as part of an international force?
I want to knock out their capital, and I want to knock out the oil, and I want to take over the oil, and I want to ring it so that the oil is safe, and we're going to take the oil.
It wouldn't be a smart move to be overly specific on how he's tactically going to be going about doing this. So he's right to avoid answering this one question directly.
We're going to give some of the profits of the oil to our wounded warriors and to our veterans and to the families of the people whose family and whose sons and daughters died in Iraq, Afghanistan, and Syria.
Agreed. That sounds great. So how many troops? 10,000 maybe? Would you support 10,000 ground troops?
Yes, I would.
Yeah. All right, and who would you be comfortable? Again, we need to figure out how to do this moving forward. Would you be comfortable with those troops working with?
Watch how Mika reacts to Joe here.
Say Russia, and when you brought up the Saudis as part of a bigger international force in Syria and Iraq?
She's one of those women who doesn't have to say anything. You can tell by her expressions on how she's feeling in the moment, and she reacted pretty harshly to what Joe says here in the beginning about Russia.
Yes, I would.
Okay.
I would. I think it's wonderful if Russia wants to drop bombs on ISIS. Anybody wants to drop bombs on ISIS, I'm all for them.
All right, so let's go to domestic politics. Ted Cruz is ahead in one poll in Iowa. You're ahead in all the others. Is Ted Cruz right now your main competitor for the Republican nomination?
Granted, Iowa is a very important state in the election, I just learned.
I don't think so. He might be, but I really don't think so.
Ben Carson down 19 points in the latest Monmouth poll. I said that seemed to me the headline. Is Ben Carson finished as a prospective Republican nominee?
Well, I think he's a very nice man. I like him very much. Yes, I think he's finished as a nominee.
Ben Carson was the only Republican opponent that I recall Trump having a soft spot for, and his response here makes that more evident.
All right, who is your greatest competition
right now? Well, I don't want to say, but I don't think...
He's thinking, should I say it? Should I say it? Fuck it, I'll say it.
Look, I don't know if that I have anybody. I'm so far ahead. I mean, I watch you too. I don't think really I have anybody. I'm leading in every poll. I'm doing great in South Carolina. You had to see the crowd last night in South Carolina.
We saw it.
The largest crowd in the history of that ship.
I don't even think he's trolling here. I really don't think he can help himself.
What is final thoughts? What's your final? Here's your opportunity as the guy who right now is the highest ranking Republican, certainly obviously grabbing the most headlines and have the highest polls. What's your message to Muslim Americans right now as we conclude this interview?
We love you. We want to work with you. We want you to turn in the bad ones. We want you to practice vigilance. We want vigilance. We know that you know a lot in many cases. We want you to turn in the bad ones. We all want to get along. We want to get back to a normal, peaceful life.
All right, Donald Trump, we greatly appreciate you calling in.
Trump.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
So I overall agree with Morning Joe. This video is not only long, but the back and forth between Trump and the Morning Joe crew is mostly ridiculous. So Trump was consistent in his off-the-wall rebuttals, and the Morning Joe crew was extremely inconsistent in the tactics they used to debate Trump here. It seemed like somebody had Trump pinned down for a second, and then suddenly they ruined it with some polling question or an irrelevant accusation. Trump is both irritating and hilarious here. His language is so purposely precise and repetitive. He's not really like a typical politician at times, but at other times it's blatantly obvious he was avoiding certain questions, although there's certain questions he was correct to avoid, like when he chose not to directly answer the question about his opinion on FDR's internment camps, since he wouldn't really have the time to give his reasons why he approved of them in the first place. It's difficult for me to bash Trump here because from what I've learned, in 2018 so far, his hand in defeating ISIS has been significant. There's really not much recent coverage on the Muslim ban, and that immediately raises up a red flag for me. But here's a paragraph from an article written in January 2018 about Trump and his attribution towards the fight against ISIS on heritage.org, titled, "Did Trump Really Beat ISIS?" It reads, quote, "The facts on the ground in Syria and Iraq have changed dramatically. ISIS lost control of Mosul, the second largest city in Iraq, in July 2017. 3 months later, ISIS capital, the Syrian city Raqqa, fell." I can't roll my R's. Many fighters retreated to Deir ez-Zor in the country's east. In November 2017, that too fell. The caliphate that Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi announced with such fanfare in the summer of 2014 was in tatters, end quote. I still do blatantly disagree with how Trump generalizes and labels Muslims. He set out and did what he said he would set out to do if elected. The liberal media really fucked up with this guy because you can't just demonize a troll for everything he does. That's only going to make him stronger, Trump specifically. I don't believe Trump would have won if the liberal media hadn't gone so overboard with every little thing Trump did. CNN did more for Trump's campaign than Fox News did, if that says anything. I read all of the Supreme Court cases against Donald Trump regarding his anti-Muslim rhetoric, and it's the same shit you see here. There were times he flirted with the idea of shutting down mosques. That was pretty fucked. Oh, and the times when he told the story about General Pershing of the U.S. dipping bullets in pig's blood and killing 49 terrorists, with the overall moral of the story being that for 25 years there wasn't any problem with terrorism. I mean, that happened. In conclusion, I want to give a shout out to Joe because I believe he did the best job compared to everyone else on this panel. He did seem like he was trying to get down to the facts and the hard-hitting questions with this exclusive for the most part. Willie did good as well. Mika made some faces.